locations. I'm going to go back to that for just a second. The other thing I just want to point out on this slide is if you look at the timelines as to when those were approved, it's important to note that several of these were done while they were in the county under the county rules for separation and size and things like that. The one sign that you would see up there at the north end, which is the lottery sign, the thing that I want to point out to that is right now it would be considered a legal non-conforming sign, and that's because it was in place before that property was annexed. And so we already have a status there where it was brought in under different regulations. It retains that legal non-conforming status, and even with these changes, it would have a legal non-conforming status as well because it would likely not meet our requirements that we're proposing tonight. From the standpoint of the regulations, you can see here this is just a rough graphic that shows you the frontage area where various jurisdictions come into play. The blue line area are inside the city limits of Gardner. The red line is out in unincorporated Johnson County, and then there's a short purple segment near the south end of I-35 there that reflects the Edgerton city limits along I-35. Just very briefly, I mentioned that we have to deal with the Kansas regulations as well as Johnson County regulations. The key on understanding that is that we can be more restrictive but not less restrictive than the state regulations. So when you're considering these amendments, we have to keep in mind that the state regulations are really the minimum level of regulation or the regulation that we have to meet. We can go beyond that and be more restrictive, but we can't go under that. So when we look at separation distances, size of the signs, things like that, that is really the minimum set by the state, or if we have more restrictive standards, that's what is before you tonight. In the city of Gardner, we do look at this. The sign regulations are within the Unified Development Code. We want to look at the zoning districts and the use standards and the building standards, as well as the sign standards when we are looking at this, because one of the things we're establishing is this type of sign would be considered a land use. And that's a little bit different than previous sign regulations in the way we looked at signs. And that's primarily because of Supreme Court rulings in the past few years that keep us from regulating the messaging on signs. And I'll point that out when we get to the one section that we're recommending a deletion of, where we focused on the business message, and therefore it regulated and basically did not allow for billboards to be in place. But that was message-based, and so that would be in violation of the Supreme Court ruling. So what we've done is we're getting away from any type of definition of signage by message and then looking at the physical qualities of the actual structure itself. So that's where we get into the idea that this would be considered a use. The interesting thing here, as we've talked about before, and you'll remember, when it comes to adjustments, all of these amendments, because they are in the UDO, or the Unified Development Code, would be subject to some of those administrative adjustments that we set up through some of our previous amendments. So in the case of an administrative site plan, if that came forward for the parcel of property, we could actually, as staff, have about a 10% discretion on those measurements and calculations that are associated with that sign. So we could grant deviations up to 10% in those measurement areas. When it comes to site plan and design review, you all would have the discretion to grant those deviations up to a 20% discretionary adjustment. And then for plan districts and development plans, obviously those are for greater than 20%, and that's when those full deviations are requested by the applicant themselves. That would go to you as a plan commission for recommendation, and then on to the city council for approval. In regard to the proposed amendments, I'm just going to briefly go through this. I mentioned already that we are looking at signs as a use of property instead of as they were typically looked at. And to do that, we've defined two sign categories: ancillary signs, which are signs associated with a use on the property or supporting a use on the property, whereas a principal use sign is not associated with a use on the property. So it's just a standalone sign that has a message to it. To do this, or to accommodate this amendment, we had to revise Table 5-2, the use table, and we've put those two categories of signs into the communications and utilities grouping. The reason we did this, and I think we had a question on this last month, one of the reasons we did that is when we look at communications and utilities, we looked at that definition for that group, and we felt this is the way that information is communicated, is what's on the signboard itself. So it felt that those uses would logically group with the communications area. In regard to Chapter 17.10, the sign standards, what we are proposing is that we would allow principal use signs in the C3, M1, and M2 districts. The reason you see C2 crossed out here was that when I reviewed it after last month's meeting, I noticed in some areas we had mentioned C2 and in other areas we had not. So to be consistent, I pulled the C2 from this revised or updated amendment. Again, as I noted before, there are properties that are both C2 or C3 along I-35, so we may want to discuss that a little bit further if you feel differently about this. But most of the properties along I-35 are C3 properties, the commercial zone properties. These types of signs would only be allowed on property abutting or adjacent to I-35, nowhere else in the city. They would not be allowed along interchange ramps, acceleration or deceleration lanes, or for 500 feet beyond such lanes. So we have a distance separation from the interchanges before these signs could show up. So if you remember the lottery sign, and I mentioned that would be a legal non-conforming sign, in this particular case, this would be one of the reasons it's a legal non-conforming sign. It was established prior to these regulations if they're passed, but under these regulations, such a condition would not be permitted. The vehicular access must be provided from the nearest roadway other than I-35. Again, this is for emergency vehicle purposes. If there was an incident at the sign, whether it's as part of the construction effort to put the structure up, whether it's changing the sign face, or just somebody trespassing that gets stuck on the sign or does something malicious to the sign, we need to be able to get emergency vehicles to that sign. We would rely a lot on the fire department to give us guidance as to what's an acceptable surfacing and how that would hold up to the weight of those trucks. And so these kinds of permits, as the applications are made, would be subject to that staff review as well as the planning review. The last item on this particular slide, the maximum number, we did have a recommendation of 1 per parcel, but after the discussion last month, it was felt that we could remove that given all the separation distance requirements that we had, especially in regard to locations in light of interchanges, but also the residentially zoned properties. By the time you started looking at all those factors, it was felt that this item could be removed from the amendments. Again, looking at some of the separation distances, I won't go into these in great detail. You'll see that there's a greater recommended separation distance for the electrical and digital type signs. We feel that that's an important item. Again, we are exceeding what is required by the state. In this particular case, we're a little more restrictive, but I also feel we're consistent with what the county is also required too. So in this sense, we're a little more restrictive than the state, but I believe it's an acceptable separation distance for what we're trying to do. The thing that I want to mention on separation distances just briefly is that we would be measuring that along the center line of I-35. So when you're thinking about separation of those signs, we wanted that nice linear measurement piece instead of trying to figure out, well, if it's set back 5 feet here and 10 feet, what's the angle? We're looking at it as you take a perpendicular line to the center line. That's how we'll measure the separation distances in this particular case. As far as total display area, the recommendation is for 750 square feet. The red language is language that I've added since last month just to briefly clarify that we're talking about facing the same direction. I don't want people to be confused to say, well, can I have a sign on both sides of the structure? Yes, you can. It's 750 square feet of display area that's allowed facing any one direction. So if you have that double face sign, that would be allowed, but it cannot be over that size. In regard to the maximum dimensions, you can see 15 feet by 50 feet, which equates to the 750 square feet of display area. And then in the maximum height, We had a recommendation of 30 feet, which has remained, but we felt comfortable after the discussion last month that we could allow up to 50 feet through a conditional use permit process. This would allow the applicant to look at topography conditions in the property that may require the sign to actually be a little bit higher. Also some of the other visibility factors that are there, but then also allow the commission and the city to look at any sensitivities it may have in regard to residential property that might also be impacted by raising the height of the sign. So that's why we went with that added amount. In regard to other changes, you can see here the setback. We were comfortable with changing that from 50 feet to 15 feet after the discussion last month, and nothing changed in regard to the separation from the residential properties. The two graphics here just briefly are intended to show you the separation distance from residentially zoned property. The first one is the 500-foot requirement, and this would be for non-digital signs. So a non-digital principal use sign could be placed on a commercial C3 property or greater, but would have to be outside of that red ring that you see associated with the residentially zoned property. In the case of electric, I can't tell if that changed or not. Oops, it did. In the case of the electric signs or electric LED signs, it's a 1,000-foot separation, and you can see there how that red ring expands. Again, recognizing though on that southeast side of the interstate in the Johnson County jurisdiction, these regulations would not apply if an application were made to Johnson County. They would have to meet the Johnson County regulations in the unincorporated area, so just be aware of that. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here other than to say that principal use signs would be considered one of two types, either a monument sign or a pole sign. Our sign standards do require some landscape improvements associated with those types of signs, so that would be part of the application process and would be reviewed to make sure they're meeting that landscaping requirement. I'll also indicate here that when it comes to the landscaping, we're not going to require landscaping that blocks the signage. So as we're thinking about this, if there's removal of trees and other things that go on as part of building the structure, we want to make sure that we're getting some landscaping back as part of that process too. So we'll work with the applicants on what's required there. In regard to lighting, you can see here that we would not allow any flashing, intermittent, or moving lights. All of the direct and indirect lighting sources would be shielded to prevent glare, and then there is a limitation as to the brightness of the LED or digital signs that are out there. I'll just briefly mention that the units that are indicated here, as well as the 10-second display change, are consistent with other sections of our sign regulations having to do with message boards. So we've just simply taken that and added it to this section. The other part that we're always concerned about with structures of this size is that they're built adequately and that they're kept in good condition. So the items that we've included here under construction and maintenance are really associated with what would be required beyond the sign permit, making sure that the construction is up to the requirements of our building code as well. So we would have that licensed registered engineer from the state of Kansas certifying some applications to ensure that the structure is sound and meeting those industry standards. And then maintenance activities would continue to go on to make sure that that structure doesn't start falling apart. You know, many of us have seen on the interstates older sign structures where the wooden structure has started to rot or fall off, or in some cases even with metal signage, you'll see that there's pieces that are not being maintained correctly and have come out of whack due to wind and other factors. So as part of that, to help ensure that the maintenance occurs, every 5 years, the sign permit for these types of signs would have to be renewed, again, with a structural analysis or a structural element provided by a certified engineer registered with the state of Kansas to, again, ensure that it's structurally sound and good condition. So that allows us to keep a maintenance standard going there. Just briefly, the final part of this has to do with the idea that no matter what we do with our regulations, these signs would still be subject to all applicable state and federal regulations beyond ours. So anything that we have not addressed we are defaulting to that state standard essentially on other factors. So there are some other items that we don't get into those kinds of details that the state does, and we just prefer that you follow the state regulations. The state's going to help do that and make sure that they hit those regulations. And in fact, for these types of signs, they go through a licensing process. I believe it's an annual review or an annual renewal of those things. So the state does keep an inventory of these signs and also make sure that those things are updated and renewed on an annual basis. And then the last item here, as I mentioned before about messaging, we are recommending the removal of a standard that is currently in section 17.10.050K, and that says any sign with a business message shall be located on the site of the business activity. The mere fact that it points to the messaging is what makes this in conflict with the Supreme Court ruling. We cannot regulate messages on these signs or on any sign of any type. So that's when we sit back and go, this portion of the code no longer is in keeping, so we're removing that and now moving to this idea that these signs are uses of property. Staff recommendation at this point is to conduct a public hearing again tonight. We did publish the hearing for tonight, again, based on the idea that we were making some changes from the last presentation of amendments. After conducting a public hearing, you'll want to discuss the proposed amendments and make a recommendation to the governing body regarding those amendments. And as motion options, you do have three options here. Certainly you could agree with what's in the staff memo and make a motion to recommend approval of that. Otherwise, you could make a motion to recommend approval of the amendments with modifications, and you'd want to list those modifications, or you may want to recommend disapproval of any amendments and stick with what we have. So with that, I'm going to step down and let you conduct the rest of the meeting, and I am available for questions.
Thank you. All right, as stated by the presentation, we will have another public hearing on this item. At this time, I will open the public hearing. Do we have anybody who would like to speak to the public hearing? Seeing no one come forward, I would accept a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion by Commissioner McNear and a second by Commissioner Mader to close the public hearing. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any against? Any abstentions? The public hearing is closed. All right, because we had this item last week, I will just open it up for general discussion if anybody had anything they would like to speak to.
I would just like to say thank you for including all of the items that we had brought up at the last meeting in the presentation. I understand the city needing to meet the requirements and remove the messaging content. And I know that I was dissuaged a little bit by the new standards, but I think with the letters that we received at the last meeting from the business owners and the amendments and the decisions that we had made at the last discussion, I am more favorable to the outcome than I was last month. So thank you for explaining in detail all of the things that we were looking at for clarification, because that really did help me.
Okay, does anyone, you have anything further?
Nothing.
I'm sorry, anything further?
No.
Does anybody have anything else? Okay, Commissioner.
One question, is the 15-foot setback, is that for, like, if we had a monument sign, is that for the base, or is that for the entire sign itself?
So it would be any portion of the sign itself. So whether it's a monument or a pole sign, so a lot of times they're cantilevered.
Yep.
Some of them will have two pole structures and it'll be cantilevered a little bit over, or one pole structure, monopole, and cantilevered. So it's from the edge of the sign back. So, or from basically the right-of-way line to the edge of the sign at that point in time. Just as a recap from last month, you'll recall we were originally asking for 50 feet. I think the people that spoke to that last month made an effective argument about different topographic situations as well as vegetation situations and how 50 feet might be a little much. The neither the state nor Johnson County, I believe, require any setback. I like to have a little bit of setback again because if the right-of-way needs to be moved because of expansion, or if there's utility easements that want to go in along the right-of-way area, this would allow that to happen with some area without having to move the sign. I've actually worked in jurisdictions where there have been changes made to the right-of-way for expansion, and those signs at the cost of the taxpayers are taken down and re-established in a new location. So I feel more comfortable with some buffer than no buffer.
Anything else, Commissioner?
I have a question. This has to do with separation distance. Does our code take into consideration the distance between signs that may be, for example, in Johnson County versus in Gardner?
So I think what's going to happen with the signs that are in Johnson County right now, and if you look at, go to the slide that has the separation from residential property. Go back to those maps. There we go. We go to the next one, to the 1,000 feet. It's a little more. So if you think about this, we've got two things going on, and so I'm going to be a little non-committal. Generally, we can only look at what is inside the city of Gardner. Okay, so if we were really talking about this separation, we would be most concerned about what's in the city of Gardner itself. With so much of this area in Johnson County, the unincorporated area, and as I think we heard a little bit from the people that were kind of pushing the amendments for us, both Fred, Mr. Winger, and the property owner to the south, Johnson County's regulations are pretty stringent in regard to height and what they allow and what's going on. And so there's not been a lot of interest in even doing signs in those areas at this point in time. What we looked at with the 3 signs that are currently there, which are up in that north part, it does not seem like there would be much area for new signs to go in when you consider the separation distances that we have, as well as the Johnson County regulations and where the current signs are, that we're going to have any issues in measuring that. So I'm going to be a little non-definitive because I think there's a legal issue as to just how far we could utilize the signs in Johnson County. I think we'd have to look at it as a case-by-case basis because of that. But I also think our risk is very minimal that issue is going to be a problem for us. Again, I think after the discussion last month and doing some recalculations, there's probably only about 3 or 4 properties that are really going to have the ability in Gardner right now to put a potential principal use sign on them. So I think that's kind of what we've been looking at in that kind of situation. Again, both due to the zoning, the separation distances from the interchanges, the separation distances from the residential property and everything else. The odds of us getting county signage expanding and then being in conflict with where we may allow signs, I think we're going to still have an adequate separation at this point. But I'd be going to my legal advisor when we got into that situation. I'd be coming to the city attorney to take a look at that. My preference would be yes, I'd like it to be separated from every sign that's out there, whether it's in the county or it's here. I just don't know what the legal standing would be, and I'd have to check on that.
Anything further, Commissioner?
It's a long-winded answer. I'm sorry about that. I'm trying to cover all the bases on that because I don't think we fully anticipated that, but I do think we could get into some legal situations again where it would be a case-by-case basis. So it's hard for me to comment on, how we would really react to that scenario. It would be noted. I would go to the city attorney for guidance on it and see where we're at with that interpretation.
All right, anybody else? All right, seeing no further discussion, I would accept the motion on this item. Did you want to put the motion back up?
more than happy to make that motion, Chairman. So, let's see if I'm good with this. So after discussion, I make a motion that the Planning Commission will recommend approval of proposed amendments to Title 17 Land Development Code as provided in the staff memo and forward on to the governing body for approval.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion by Commissioner Nader and a second by Commissioner McNear. Do we have any further discussion on the motion? All those in favor state aye.
Aye.
Any against? Any abstentions? This motion passes 6-0.
For the information of the commission and those who are here tonight, this item will go to the governing body on Monday, November 15th. We do have to wait for the protest period. There's a protest period that's associated with this amendment process. So there's a 14-day process here that we wait to see if anybody has any problems with it, and they file their protests. If not, it'll continue on November 15th. So Fred, you may want to be there at the governing body meeting at that point in time. The other thing I will mention is that Mr. Wingert and Mr. Baker did approach the city with this, and I do, normally I would not say this in public, but I will. I felt that they approached with a very responsible request and a very responsible set of not just demands, but they looked at it from an analysis standpoint, and some of these recommendations and some of these adjustments are things that they were very willing to do from the very beginning. So this just wasn't one of those things where somebody came in and wanted an open-ended kind of set of amendments. So I do want to note that because it makes it a lot easier to work when I'm working with somebody that's seen this from the perspective of what the city's trying to do as well. So I want to thank them for that effort.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, regular agenda item number 2, 2022 Planning Commission meeting schedule.
Hey, I won't tell you why it's working now. We'll wait till after the meeting to discuss what's happened here. Just very quickly, each year we come back to the Planning Commission with the schedule for the next upcoming year. And per your bylaws, it does state that Planning Commission meetings will be held on the 4th Monday of each month at 7 p.m. at Gardner City Hall. Not going to throw any curveballs this year. Last year we talked about days of the week and making those adjustments, so we've kept it on Monday, which has worked very well from the standpoint of our application process this past year. And I'm not even asking for a time change. We're going to just keep it at 7 o'clock for now. As you can see, the schedule is in front of you on the screen and also has been added to the packet that you received ahead of time. I'm going to point out just a few things here. Again, our application deadlines are the first Monday of every month consistently, other than on 2 months where we have holiday conflicts, 4th of July and Labor Day. So you'll see that those are on the Tuesday following that holiday. So I want to note that. Then in regard to the Planning Commission and BZA meeting date, and again, it's important to recognize that you serve as the BZA as well. So wanted to make sure that we're setting both calendars here. When you look at this from the standpoint of that 4th Monday, you see the dates outlined except for the December date. And what I did, because the date would have been Monday, December 26th, the day after Christmas, we felt that we would push that whole application schedule as well as the meeting date in December up to be a little bit ahead of Christmas instead of right after Christmas in case we have applications there. So we made that adjustment this year. Unlike last year, I missed that. So we have a meeting that's currently scheduled on the 27th of December of this year. We'll see if we have applications or not. We're working diligently to kind of avoid that situation if we can. But right now, that adjustment has been made to December, so it would be a Tuesday, December 20th. I'd love to go to Monday, December 19th, except that is a city council night, so we would not be able to do that. And you can see then how the city council meetings are outlined. Again, that second meeting in January of 2023 for the city council, the governing body, is moved to a Tuesday because there's a holiday on January 16th of that month. So with that, that is the calendar that's being proposed in front of you. Staff recommends that you discuss the draft schedule, and upon completion of that, that you make a recommendation, well, actually, that you pass a resolution that would be allowing the Planning Commission Chair to sign that resolution for the schedule of 2022. I'm available for any questions.
Thank you. I'll open this up for general discussions. If anybody have anything they'd like to say? All right, seeing no discussion on this, I'd accept a motion.
I'll make a,
Motion.
yeah, please, you go girl.
Motion to adopt resolution PC-21-01, a resolution setting forth the Gardner Planning Commission meeting schedule for 2022.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion from Commissioner Ham and a second from Commissioner Mader. Do we have any further discussion on the motion? All right, all those in favor state aye.
Aye.
Any against? Any abstentions? Motion passes 6-0. We're done with the regular agenda, and now we have discussion items. Discussion item number 1, upcoming schedule and meeting logistics.
Couple of things, as you know from last month, our next meeting is November 22nd. That's right. Now I believe that's right. It is the Monday before Thanksgiving that week. There's a possibility that I will not be here for that meeting, but Bob Case will be here. If you have scheduled conflicts, let me know as early as possible, because if we do have a quorum conflict, we can try to arrange for an alternative date to make that happen. Chairman Bowden will not be here, will not be present for November, and so anybody else, if you have a scheduled conflict for November, the sooner you let me know, the better off we'll be, okay?
I will have a schedule.
You will also? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So we'll have to work through that. Then in December, as I noted before, I believe it's December 27th. Yeah, we're scheduled for December 27th. Right now, we have no applications in for that meeting. We're going to try to keep it that way. We will not hold up projects and applications. If somebody files by the deadline, things like that, we will move forward with that. But we will also look at alternative dates. So if a public hearing is not necessary, or we don't have to publish that, we may be able to make an adjustment to the meeting dates through a process that will allow us to maybe go to an alternative date and consider those items. So if we have something like a final plat, those kinds of issues that just come before you without public hearings, we can do that relatively easy and move through the process. So we'll be monitoring that. If you have problems coming up with that particular item, please let me know again so that we're in good shape on that. In regard to meeting logistics, we talked about this briefly last month as Commissioner Bowden informed us that he would be moving out of town, so he would no longer be serving on the Planning Commission. Fortunately, your move date got pushed, so that's all good. So we're in good shape for this meeting, but this will be his last meeting, so what will happen, Commissioner Mader is the vice chair. She would be filling in the role of chair, but would retain her office as vice chair. I'm going to do some research with the bylaws and talk with Spencer and our city attorney a little bit about processes moving forward. But in the interim, she would have that interim kind of chair position, but still be in her same officer position. Your elections are scheduled for May of every year. I know that there are reappointments that are coming up. I think in this next year, there's at least 2, maybe. I've got to check. There's been so many new people filling different positions that I don't know if they were partial fills. I don't know how that has worked out. So I want to double check, because I think the way it was originally set up is every year there was a couple people that are up for that reappointment process. But with new faces that we've had in the last 12 months, I'm not sure if we were filling a term or if that got changed in some way or not. So I'm going to double check everything there, get back with you all and see if we will need to conduct some type of process where we hold an officer election just to re-elect or not, or if we wait till May, or how we go through it. So we'll figure it out and work with you on that. But I just want to make you aware from a logistical standpoint, we just need to make sure sure I want to get whoever's going to fill Commissioner Bowden's seat, want to get them appointed. The mayor, the council, and the city clerk are working on that, looking at applications. They'll interview people, and then they'll make a selection and place them forward to the planning commission.
So that process has started?
Yes, they have started that. They've started looking at
Okay,
things. The
I
city
didn't
clerk-
see anything
Yeah.
come out on the text caster or anything on the
city,
website or?
I'm trying to think, the city clerk, and I'll double check that, but the city
Okay.
clerk, after last month, when it was announced,
Uh-huh.
she was already getting anxious about doing things. Now, whether the mayor and the council have
Yeah.
actually narrowed anything down, or if they're just getting.
Yeah, typically that
applications,
comes out on like the text caster, the email blast, or out on the website. I hadn't seen any of
Okay,
that.
I'll double check.
Yeah, that would be great.
My
Thank you.
understanding was she handles all of that. So
Sure,
I'll
yeah,
double
just,
check.
just to keep everything transparent and
Yep.
open and, follow the process and.
Okay.
Cool.
I'll do that,
Thank
and
you.
if I have an update, I'll get it out to everybody.
Okay, good to know things are already in motion at least.
Yeah, and she was
So we don't have
on
an
it pretty
empty
quick.
seat.
I'll remind everybody, as of right now, if you can't make the meeting next month, that you will be running the meeting in November
Let me
as
give
the
it to the
secretary.
city.
It says the secretary. No, that's you, Dave.
We'll see.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll see what we got.
Because I am gonna be on an airplane.
Which will
so
be
I
real-
Can't even,
yeah.
I can't even.
Which is
But also, if I recall correctly, within the bylaws, either the chair or the secretary can make a like an agenda item. We can vote to move the meeting.
yeah.
So-
we can figure
There,
it out.
so what I'm saying, I mean, we're in an active session right now. So if there's like a general consensus, and I'm thinking from previous bylaws, that the chair or the secretary can initiate that type of activity, that you change the meeting date, if there's general consensus.
And the
I
only
didn't know.
question I had.
But that was like from 2014.
The only question that I have that we would have to check on is the one item for November that's coming up. There's a car wash item coming up in the Plaza South area. I believe it's a final development plan and probably a final plat.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't believe a public hearing is required. I'm not positive of that, because the zoning's all set, everything's
Okay.
in place, the preliminary plan was approved. If it's
You
a
wouldn't
final
have-
plan and a final plat, there is no published
That's
public hearing for it. That would be my only concern, is the logistics of publication of a public hearing. Could we?
Well, you
could
would have,
we
we
tonight,
would have
there
already
was a
had to
preference for
publish
an
it.
alternative
so
date?
30
Could we
days.
agree to an alternative date and publish that?
I'm
if
pretty
we
sure.
needed to? I'm gonna let.
Yeah,
keep
absolutely,
looking
because
there.
I was thinking about that. Just,
Yeah. And
While he looks that up, if we were done with logistics, you could move on to the
Yeah,
next
well,
discussion
he's
item
doing that.
and
Yeah,
give you time.
Yeah, because we can see if there's some common consensus about an alternative date.
Mhm.
And then what we could do, if we have that consensus here tonight, we could just stipulate we're staying with the current date, but if, right? And then if we make our change, we just have to make a publication out that says that the planning commission meeting is being changed. That I do know we would have to do, because your schedule is published
Right.
for that date.
That would
We would
require
just
that.
have to get a notice out to the public that says November's meeting is now being moved from to. I
Correct.
don't think we'd have to necessarily have a formal, I would hope we could do it that way.
Makes sense, yeah, we could be fine with it like that, we could check.
Okay.
Yeah, double check everything. I'm just.
I might just have a paper copy of my desk in the office, so.
I used to curtain out.
Okay. You want me to move to
Yeah,
two
go
real
ahead.
quick?
Yeah.
In regard to development activity, I put this on here. I want to try to do this as kind of a standing item every month, just to kind of get you some summary type items. I am producing, Melissa is, our department. We are producing a monthly building permit report now. We're pretty good about the data. We're feeling comfortable with the data that's feeding that table and going in. What I do want to mention to you all is, and you've probably seen it, our planning commission agendas have been pretty light for the last few months. We've been anticipating that the approvals from 2020 and things were going to generate building, and we kept waiting and waiting and waiting for that cycle to hit. I can report to you that within the last 3 weeks, it did hit. eventually here, I think what we've been waiting on is utilities to get in motion for Hilltop, utilities for Grata, and also even down at Tuscan Farms, there've been some utility issues that have had to been addressed. All three of those developments, those utilities are either in or partially in. In the last 3 weeks, we've had 26 single-family building permits that have been brought in for processing and application. We may even have a few more than that now. But we were at 26 over that 3-week period. And also from the Grata Treadway situation, we did get building permits, I believe, for 7 of the structures, the first phase of that, including some garages and the clubhouse area and things like that. So the building permits are now starting to come in from development that we had looked at very early in this year and in 2020. Again, I think the speculation was that it was going to move faster, but with supply chain issues, labor issues, just in general, the way the marketplace has been, it's been slow, and really no fault of anybody. The best we can tell, the builders have had issues in getting everything. Well, lumber prices went way up for a while, to PVC being short and that price going up. We've had issues on utility sides with things like electric transformers and backlog on ordering. It's been a very interesting year, to say the least. So many of the building permit projections for this year and what we initially thought was going to happen has probably been delayed by, I would say, 4 to 5 months from where we thought we would be. There's a possibility we still may issue or find ourselves with building permit issuances equal to last year, but I think we're going to be slightly behind last year's count at this point. I will try to include you moving forward on the monthly building permit report so you can see that, or get it to you during this meeting. It's usually produced in that first week of the month. Melissa takes the end of the month numbers and gets them calculated and formatted and gets them out. So just be aware of that. The other item that I wanted to make you aware of, we are meeting with the Economic Development Citizens Advisory Committee, which EDAC, if you will. That is a group that gets together. They're supposed to get together at least once a quarter. We've been getting together monthly with them. They've been looking at the downtown destination plan, or destination downtown plan, and a couple other items from an economic standpoint, getting up to speed on things. Next month, they're going to be considering making a recommendation to the governing body to update the market analysis for Gardner. That was done in 2018 as part of the Main Street corridor planning effort and things like that. The general feeling is with 2020 census data now unrolling and coming out here over the next few months, more details are being revealed there, as well as with what's happened with the pandemic and everything, that there's enough market change that they feel that maybe an update to that analysis would be appropriate at this point in time. So they're going to be talking about that at their meeting on November 10th, I believe, is when we're meeting with them. So just be aware they're becoming an active group again. And so where I can, I've been getting them introduced with the comprehensive plan, downtown plan, all of those kinds of things, so that they have an understanding of the connection between the planning work and economic development work and moving forward. So just wanted to make you aware of those situations. That's all I've got. Looks like, did you find the bylaws?
Yes, you can call it, is there,
Are you thinking of a special meeting? I mean, you can call a
Well,
special
you can call a
session.
special meeting.
Yes, if you wanted
Yeah.
to call it just a special session,
Yeah.
you could pick another date, we just need a majority
Yeah.
vote. Hypothetically, I don't know that you need to have that vote during an active meeting if you all can't decide on a date tonight, but I would prefer that we just do it now.
I would agree.
Well, we're all here, it's open for everyone, so.
And I guess, maybe, Chairman, we might want to bounce back to staff and see if, if we've got a good agenda coming up, or perhaps we just cancel.
Yeah.
It sounds like we might have something, but I'll leave it to your discretion.
Yeah, and we don't know yet on that, so
You might have a,
we could set it, and then I guess if we end up not having it, or the city.
So we have one item that's moving its way through the process at this point in time. That's the car wash item that I mentioned earlier. I'm just looking at this. What we could do is move it to November 29th, which is a 5th Monday in the month, so it wouldn't conflict with any city council activity. It wouldn't mess with anything. We just got to all remember, come back from Thanksgiving, you got a meeting that night.
And that's what I was just gonna suggest, but I wasn't sure what your schedule was.
Yeah, no, that-
Would it work for you? How do others feel about that?
Is everybody all right?
I'm
For
fine
November
with
29th?
November 29th.
I have no idea.
Well, we have a quorum, we have 4,
Yeah.
because obviously I won't be here, so I'm not gonna.
And we may not have an appointment, we'll likely, I don't know, we may not have an appointment filling your role by then, either, so that may be 2 people down at that point, which would mean the other 4 would have to be here for that. Because I'm a non-voting, if I run the meeting, it doesn't matter, I'm a non-voting member, so I can't count as part of the quorum.
But we have 4 here that said it's fine, and that, that would be the quorum, so then Commissioner Cooper, we'll find out later, and then of course we don't know about the commissioner that's not here, so. Are we in agreement then to have the special meeting, I guess, November 29th?
Yeah.
Okay, do we need an actual vote, was that good enough?
You gotta have majority, so if you wanna make a vote, you might as well do it to tie it off.
All right, I'll accept a motion to have a special meeting of the planning commission for Gardner on November 29th at 7 p.m.
So, really quick, before anyone makes a motion.
Yep, no.
Then does the second part of the motion need to state that we are canceling the regularly scheduled meeting for Monday, November 22nd? It's like a two-part.
Or can that be
Two-parter.
just, or can that just be what's put out?
It might be able to be administratively canceled.
Well, they gotta publish.
Yeah,
But they can publish the meetings.
I think it might be a twofer. I don't know.
So yeah, I think for the motion for this, it's probably okay, just do the special meeting on that date. on the
Okay.
29th.
And then you publish it.
And then I'll
Okay,
publish.
okay,
I'll
and then
publish
that, the
this.
publication will take care of the ramifications.
Okay, so I make the motion.
I make a motion that the planning commission host a special meeting on November 29th, 2021 at 7 PM at City Hall.
And a second.
Second.
All right, I have a motion by Commissioner Nader and a second by Commissioner Ham. Any further discussion on this motion? All those in favor state aye.
Aye.
Any against? Motion passes. Actually, I'm gonna abstain, so motion passes 5.
2 abstentions.
You abstain?
Yeah, no.
Okay, motion passes 4-0. With 2 abstentions. All right, do we have anything further?
Could do one more clarification item, just to make sure, since we've got city attorney representation tonight. Commissioner Bowden had asked me about signing things that were approved while he was serving as chairman. I assume that even though this would happen at a later date, potentially he would still be the one that signs it. Okay.
Yes.
All right, we're good.
Okay. Still good.
I just wanted to make sure legally that we got that covered.
I'll still be in Gardner, so I'll be able to.
Yeah, so we'll give you a call like on the resolution